Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. So this is the second video in my Afghanistan deployment series I was doing. The first one talked about all the training that I did to get to the point where I could go on my deployment to Afghanistan. So this one is about the travel that it took to get there, because people don't really know about all the traveling that it takes to get on deployment. You don't just fly from here to there in one trip and then you're on deployment. In my case, there was lots of different legs. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. This is part 2 about travel to get in country. So I traveled from the US to Afghanistan. Now this is a whole ordeal in and of itself because you have so much gear. You also have 2 weapons to carry on a civilian airplane, and you have a long ways to go. A lot of different aircraft. So I have these big rolling duffel bags filled with all my clothes and gear and stuff like that. I ended up shipping a bunch of my stuff ahead of me in a box, and that was a very good tip that I got. So I definitely recommend that if you are getting deployed somewhere. Find out an address that's good to send stuff to and send stuff ahead of yourself in boxes or totes or something like that, so that way you don't have to carry all that stuff through all these airports. You're sticking out because you're in uniform, and it's not a great experience. But anyway, so I had this gear and 2 weapons. So I went to the Indianapolis airport, and I flew out of Indy to Norfolk, Virginia, which is where my rotator was. So I had all my gear there. I had to check my weapons, especially, but they were able to do that for me. And then I got to Norfolk, Virginia, where I spent the night. And then the next day in the late evening, we got to the rotator. So there are rotators that go various different places. This wasn't the regular rotator to Afghanistan, but it was just whatever worked for me, I guess. So I got on a plane full of other military folks. We all got on this plane with our gear and took off. Our first stop was in Ireland, Shannon Airport in Ireland. I have a little map here going from Indianapolis to Norfolk, Virginia to Ireland. That was about a 6-hour flight to Ireland. And while we were in Ireland, we had a few hour layover. So we had some Guinness beers, got off the plane, stretched our legs, and relaxed there a bit. Then we got back on the plane and we flew to Kuwait. When we were in Kuwait, we just sat on the tarmac for a while the airplane got refueled, did not leave the airplane. From there, from Kuwait, we flew to Al Udeid Air Base, which was in Qatar. Al Udeid, in the middle of the summer, it's very hot. So this was pretty much the end of our first leg of flying. We had been traveling for almost a day at this point with our layovers and everything, and now we were in Al Udeid. It felt like the hottest place on earth. It was so hot. We were able to keep our gear there at the passenger terminal, and then we just took whatever we needed, like our 72-hour bag, which is this big camouflage backpack that we had with us, and we took that into where we'd be sleeping. And where we were sleeping was a giant sort of it was just really big. I would say it's like a big warehouse, just a big open room, huge, full of bunk beds. And it's dark and it's cold, which is good because it's so hot. When you want to sleep, you go to there. It's the transient dorms is what it's called. So you go in there with a little light, not to wake anybody up. You find a bunk bed that nobody is on, and you put your stuff there and you sleep. And that's how it is 24 hours a day. The lights never go on in that place. So I was there for a couple of days. We had to check in each day to find out when our next leg of the journey was going to be. And while we were there, we enjoyed ourselves a bit. So we were able to, they did have drinks there. There's a Fox Sports Bar there. So we had 3 drinks a day while we were there. Other than that, we were able to go to the gym and just kind of relax. They did have a pool there, but I didn't go to the pool. I was pretty much just trying to stay out of the heat as much as possible. Finally, they're like, hey, your flight is going to be this evening at like 11 o'clock at night. So there you go. 11 o'clock at night, we went back to the PAX terminal and we got on if I remember right, it was a C-17. So here's a picture of me on the C-17, mostly cargo and some passengers on a C-17, which flew from Al Udeid to Bagram Air Base, which is in Afghanistan. So I'm just having a great time there on the C-17, ready to go. So then we finally get to Bagram Air Base, and we're still maybe like, I guess probably about 30, 40 miles from Kabul, which is what our main base location is going to be for this deployment. So we get to Bagram Air Base, and at this point we are kind of on our own. We don't have any scheduled flights because we're going to take a helicopter in for that last bit of the journey. It looked like we were going down to stay overnight there in Bagram in their transient dorms, but one of our fellow passengers that was going with us, he was actually my boss during this whole deployment. He talked to some folks and seen if there was a helicopter we could get on, and luckily there was one about to take off that had empty seats in it. So they're like, hey, we got to get our stuff. So we weighed our stuff, we ran out to the flight line and jumped on this helicopter and flew us into Kabul. So here's a picture of me on the helicopter. Here's us on the helicopter, and the guy in the blue shirt is a loadmaster for this helicopter. So he's a contractor, and that's his job. So that's how we finally got into Kabul, Afghanistan. And we spent the entire time at the Kabul airport, basically. The Kabul airport has got a big footprint, sort of, and there's dorms, buildings, and things like that. So we basically lived within like 100 meters or so of the airport. And that's where we spent all of our time. We were about 5 miles from the embassy. If you did have to go to the embassy, you had to take a helicopter. You had to schedule that. So you're like, hey, I want to make a trip to the embassy to do whatever you needed to do. You schedule that flight, and then they would fly you that bit, because it's not safe to drive on the roads, even like 5 miles, because the Taliban might get you. So the Taliban did shoot rockets at us, which I can get into later, but it is dangerous. We are under attack, but we're also in a fairly safe location. The biggest danger is the odd luck if the Taliban happens to shoot a mortar and it hits you. Bad luck. All right, so while I was there, what was my position? I was an air advisor, so I had to advise some people. I advised the commandant of the Air Academy, so kind of like our Air Force Academy. So I would advise him. I also advised the lieutenant colonel, Afghan lieutenant colonel, who was in charge of all the maintenance training that was happening on the base. The main thing that we were trying to do is get the Afghans and get their military ready to be able to do the mission that we had been doing ever since 2001. So we needed Afghans to be able to maintain the aircraft that we gave them. We needed them to be able to fly the aircraft that we gave them and just provide security for themselves. Being in the Air Force, we were focused on the pilots and the maintainers. The ground troops, that was the Army. So I didn't really deal with that. So I had to figure out how to keep pushing the ball forward on this training thing. And one of the biggest problems was the lack of education of the Afghans and their motivation to actually be there and do their job.